This is Canada. On paper, it sounds like a dream. Universal healthcare, stunning natural beauty, one of the most educated populations on Earth, and a global reputation as one of the friendliest, most welcoming nations you could ever hope to visit. For decades, Canada was the gold standard for quality of life. People around the world literally entered lotteries just for a chance to move there. But something strange has been happening. The people who already live in Canada, the ones who grew up there, who built their lives there, they're leaving. And not just a trickle of them. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, over 27,000 Canadians packed their bags and left the country for good. That's the second highest quarterly exodus on record since 2017, and the trend is accelerating. But here's the part that should really concern you. The ones leaving aren't retirees heading south for warmer weather. They're young professionals in their 20s and 30s, engineers, software developers, doctors, nurses, researchers, and entrepreneurs, the exact people that any economy needs to function and grow. So through the money lens, let's break down what's really happening here. What turned a country that everyone in the world wanted to get into one that its own citizens are trying to get out of? And more importantly, what does this mean for your money, whether you live in Canada or anywhere else facing similar problems? Let's start with the most obvious culprit, housing. If you want to understand why Canadians are frustrated, genuinely angry in some cases, start with how much it costs to simply put a roof over your head in this country. Canada's housing market has completely, utterly detached from what normal working people actually earn. In Toronto, the average home price hovers around 1.2 million Canadian dollars. In Vancouver, it's even worse, sitting at roughly 1.3 million. These aren't luxury mansions. These are ordinary houses, sometimes even modest condominiums, in ordinary neighborhoods. Meanwhile, the median household income in Canada sits around $70,000 a year. Run the math and you'll find that the typical Canadian home costs roughly 17 times the typical Canadian income. For context, historically, a ratio of 3 to 5 times income is considered healthy and sustainable. Canada is more than triple that threshold. But buying a home is only part of the problem. Renting has become equally brutal. The average rent for a single one-bedroom apartment in Toronto crossed $2,500 per month in 2025. In Vancouver, it's over $2,800. When you're handing over 40 to 50% of your take-home pay just for somewhere to sleep, there isn't much left for saving, investing, starting a business, or even starting a family.
And this isn't just people complaining on social media. The data tells a damning story. A 2025 study from CIBC Capital Markets found that over 31% of first-time homebuyers in Canada needed a financial gift from their parents just to scrape together a down payment. The average size of that gift? $115,000. Let that number really sink in for a moment. That's not a little help for mom and dad. That's an entire salary handed over just to get your foot in the door. The housing market has effectively created a two-tiered society. If your parents own property and have equity to share, you have a shot at home ownership. If they don't, you are essentially locked out of the market, regardless of how hard you work or how much you earn. This isn't a free market functioning as intended. It's a system where your parents' net worth matters more than your salary, more than your education, more than your talent, and more than your work ethic. Canada is quietly sliding from a meritocracy into what economists call patrimonial capitalism, a society where inherited wealth determines your future more than anything you could possibly earn through your own labor. Now here's where the money lens perspective comes in. The forces driving Canada's housing crisis are spreading to virtually every major developed economy. When any country allows housing to become a speculative asset class instead of a basic necessity, capital flows away from productive businesses and into mortgage lending. A 2025 IMF working paper confirmed this, finding a strong negative correlation between rising house prices and productivity growth. The money that should be building the next generation of companies is instead being poured into bidding wars over century-old bungalows. But housing alone doesn't fully explain the exodus. Now let's talk about money. Specifically, how much Canadians actually earn versus what they could earn just a short drive south of the border. This is where Canada's brain drain transforms from a slow leak into a hemorrhage. Consider the numbers. A software engineer in Toronto earns roughly 110,000 Canadian dollars per year. That sounds decent until you learn that the exact same role in San Francisco pays over $220,000 US dollars. Even adjusting for cost of living and the exchange rate, the American position pays dramatically more. It's not even close. A registered nurse in Vancouver makes about 80,000 Canadian dollars. Cross the border to Seattle, barely a 3-hour drive, and that same nurse earns over 110,000 US dollars, with lower tax rates, cheaper groceries, and cheaper consumer goods across the board. For doctors and specialists, the gap becomes almost absurd. Canadian physicians, particularly those in specialties like surgery, cardiology, or radiology, can realistically double or even triple their lifetime earnings by practicing in the United States. The wage gap isn't limited to tech and medicine either. Accountants, lawyers, financial analysts, project managers, even skilled tradespeople like electricians and plumbers consistently earn more south of the border. It's a pattern that cuts across virtually every professional category. And once you factor in the weaker Canadian dollar, which has been trading at roughly 72 to 74 cents against the US dollar, the real purchasing power gap becomes even wider than the nominal salary numbers suggest.
And then there's the tax situation, which amplifies everything. Canada's combined federal and provincial top marginal tax rate exceeds 53% in several provinces, including Ontario and Quebec. In many American states, the equivalent rate hovers around 37 to 40%. When you're a highly skilled worker watching more than half of every additional dollar you earn disappear into taxes while simultaneously being unable to afford a home in the city where you work, the math starts to speak for itself. Now, Canadians will push back on this by pointing to their social safety net. Universal health care, parental leave, stronger worker protections, and those are real benefits, worth perhaps $15,000 to $20,000 per year. But the salary gap for skilled professionals is $50,000 to $100,000. The safety net doesn't close that gap. It's not even close. And younger Canadians know it. So they're leaving. So if all of these skilled Canadians are departing, who exactly is replacing them? This is where Canada's immigration story gets truly complicated and, frankly, a little heartbreaking. For years, Canada has pursued one of the most aggressive immigration policies in the developed world, welcoming roughly 500,000 new permanent residents per year at its peak. The strategy seemed logical enough. Bring in skilled workers from around the globe to fill the gaps left by an aging native population and departing young talent. But the execution has been deeply flawed. According to a landmark 2025 study, appropriately titled The Leaky Bucket, 1 in 5 immigrants to Canada will leave within 25 years of arriving. And critically, the most highly educated immigrants, the engineers, the researchers, the tech professionals, leave at twice the rate of lower-skilled workers. The departure rates peak within the first 5 years, exactly the period when successful economic integration matters most. Why? Because many skilled immigrants arrive to discover their foreign credentials aren't recognized. Doctors, engineers, and architects often can't practice without years of additional Canadian certification. So these qualified professionals end up driving for rideshare companies or working retail, watching their skills deteriorate while navigating a system that promised a better life. And here's where it gets truly paradoxical. Many of these immigrants eventually realize that once they have Canadian citizenship or permanent residency, the easiest path to actually using their education and earning what they're worth is to simply move south to the United States. Canada, in effect, has become an expensive way station. People immigrate there, endure the credential recognition delays, obtain their citizenship papers, and then leave for the U.S., where salaries are higher, professional credentials are recognized faster, and career advancement is more accessible. It's an incredibly expensive conveyor belt. The Canadian taxpayer invests billions in processing applications, providing settlement services, and supporting these newcomers during their integration period, and then loses the entire economic return on that investment to its southern neighbor. Now, let's zoom out and examine what all of this means for the Canadian economy as a whole, because the effects are compounding in ways that aren't always obvious at first glance. When your most productive citizens leave, the damage goes far beyond just losing one doctor or one engineer. It's the businesses they would have started, the innovations they would have driven, the mentorship they would have provided to younger workers, the taxes they would have paid over entire careers, and the spending they would have done supporting local restaurants, shops, and service providers. The brain drain creates a vacuum that hollows out communities from the inside. The housing crisis makes this worse by acting as a capital sink. When household wealth is locked in mortgage payments, there's less seed money for startups, less disposable income for local businesses, and less investment in the productive economy. A 2025 City Ho Institute report found that Canada's per capita business investment has been declining for years, with housing costs as a primary driver. The country's eating its own future. There's also the productivity problem, which might be the most alarming statistic of all. Canada's labor productivity growth has been stagnant for well over a decade, and it now significantly trails the United States. Output per hour worked in Canada sits at roughly 74% of the US level. Part of this gap is directly attributable to brain drain. You simply cannot maintain productivity when your best workers keep leaving for a competitor economy. But part of it is structural. When your biggest industries are essentially real estate, banking that services real estate, insurance connected to real estate, construction of real estate, and legal services that facilitate real estate transactions, you're not building an economy that can compete globally in the 21st century. You're building a house of cards that happens to be made of actual houses. So can any of this actually be fixed? The honest answer is yes, but the solutions require the kind of sustained political courage that hasn't been on display in Canadian politics for a very long time. Housing reform needs to go beyond banning foreign buyers, which Canada already tried with limited impact. Real reform means rethinking zoning laws, incentivizing construction at scale, and making housing less attractive as speculation. Vacancy taxes, capital gains taxes on investment properties, and massive purpose-built rental supply. On competitiveness, Canada needs to streamline credential recognition, re-examine tax policy, and invest seriously in future industries like AI, clean energy, and biotech, so it can offer world-class careers without people needing to cross a border.
But here's the bigger lesson for anyone watching this video, wherever in the world you happen to live. What's happening in Canada is not uniquely Canadian. It's a warning signal for dozens of countries heading down the same path. When housing becomes the dominant economic activity in a nation, when the primary path to wealth requires inheritance rather than earned income, when your most talented and ambitious people can easily leave for better opportunities in a neighboring country, the same downward spiral takes hold everywhere. The money flows out, the talent follows, and the people left behind bear the cost of a shrinking tax base and declining public services. The Canadians watching this already know the feeling. But if you're in Australia watching housing prices spiral, if you're in the UK watching young professionals leave for Dubai or the US, if you're anywhere in Europe watching your best graduates head to London or New York, pay attention. This story is not just about Canada. It's about what happens when a country stops investing in its people's futures and starts treating housing as the economy itself. The good news, and there is some, is that Canada still possesses enormous fundamental advantages. One of the most educated populations on Earth, vast natural resources, genuine political stability, and a global brand that still attracts millions of aspiring immigrants every year. These are real strengths that most countries would envy. But advantages are not guarantees, and if Canada doesn't address the fundamental economic forces pushing its own people away, those advantages will slowly, steadily erode until they're just memories of what the country used to be. Because at the end of the day, an economy is not its land, it's not its natural resources, it's not even its government policies. An economy is its people, and when the people leave, they take the economy with them. There's a historical parallel worth noting. In the 90s, Ireland faced a similar crisis, hemorrhaging young talent to the US and UK. But Ireland made a deliberate choice to become business-friendly, slashed corporate taxes, invested in technology, and within a generation, the Celtic tiger was born, the brain drain reversed. Canada could follow the same playbook, but the window doesn't stay open forever, especially when your biggest competitor is right next door. That's the view through the money lens. Thanks for watching.